Hi, everybody. Mark Cooper from the Saskatchewan Construction Association. Happy to have today with us two guests, Joel Peterson and Murray Mandryk, who I will ask to introduce themselves in a moment. And Joel and Murray are joining me today to have a conversation about the upcoming provincial election, what it might mean for Saskatchewan, and what we can expect. So, Joel, can I ask you to introduce yourself first?
Sure. I'm Joel Peterson. I'm a vice president with H&K Strategies here in Regina. We're a national company, but we have an office in Regina. Been with them for about 9 years and do a variety of government relations work with a number of companies across the province, and have been politically active since I was 13, I think.
So a while.
A little while.
Okay, thanks, Joel. Murray?
I'm Murray Mandryk. I'm old, but since I haven't seen you guys for a while, I feel I'm in good company. Good to see you guys. I am the political columnist for the Regina Leader Post, and through your current roles and your past roles, I've known you guys for a fair bit of time. I've been covering the Saskatchewan legislature in one form or the other since about 1984. Wow. So I did not lay the original Tyndall stone there, but I was pretty close to.
Well, that's awesome. So we've got the right people in the room to have a conversation today about the election. So it's just under 2 months away now. So I guess October 26th, right, is the date. I guess let's start with this. What would you expect? Maybe Murray, we'll start with you. What do you expect the main issue is going to be in this provincial election campaign?
Well, because of the immediacy, it's going to be COVID and how we're dealing with that, and how and the very much the COVID related problems, how the economy is going to emerge. We've already learned last week that let's not expect balanced budgets for another 4 years. I've never seen a government do that. I can't even envision a situation where I would have ever seen a government declare going into an election campaign that we're not going to balance the budget. God bless their honesty. But it's completely unprecedented. Is the most thing happening in these particularly unprecedented times is. I think that there's going to be so much focus around how we are going to emerge from this economic crisis, and I use that word because I think it is, that's emerging, because it affects so much of our other things, our trade, what's happening in the oil sector, how that's all changing. There's going to be so much talk about that we're probably not going to get into a lot of the meat and potato issues that need to be talked about in the campaign. And that never really happens in the campaign the way you want it to, because they tend to be very short, and they tend to be about what the politicians really want to talk about. So you're going to hear an awful lot about schools. You're going to hear an awful lot about problems in the health system, a lot about what you've been hearing about currently, because election campaigns kind of live in the here and now, as I think Joel probably will recall.
Thanks, Murray. So COVID and the immediacy of the crisis being likely the dominating story. Joel, what are your thoughts on that question?
I'd have to agree with Murray on that. I wrote down health, education, COVID, and rebuild, which is, I think, kind of all the things that Murray touched on. Health and COVID and education are all tied up right now. If there's going to be an emergent issue kind of during the campaign time, just because the going back to school is happening at the same time the election will, I suspect that one will take a little bit of ink, if I can borrow from Murray on that one. And then I think the thing that I'm seeing with the companies that I work for and so on, a number of organizations are looking at what the rebuild, what the reemergence looks like within the province of Saskatchewan. We're still in COVID, but given that the economy has had a bit of a downturn, and the federal and provincial economies have had a bit of a downturn, I think that people are kind of looking for what's next, and I think both parties would have to come out fairly strongly and say, the best that we can plan is this is what we're going to plan for.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, sort of a follow-on to that. If the major issue is going to be, or the theme of it is, or the issues is going to be under the COVID banner, one of the things that I was on a call with a minister last week, and they mentioned that, the public's temperature around this issue varies directly with the case numbers, right? So as case numbers are spiking, as they were early in the summer, they got a lot more political attention, a lot more concern about, oh, we need to be careful, we need, and then as the case numbers started to come down, as they did in August, that sort of relaxed, and people were saying, oh, well, we don't need to worry as much. And so with that trend, could we see the COVID case numbers, like if there's a spike of case numbers in September or in October, could we see that have an effect on the outcome of the election?
I'll start, and no, in the sense that I don't think there's a hell of a lot that's going to affect the outcome of the election because of the political dynamic. And right now, there's just, at least in my humble opinion, not a sense that in the public right now that the NDP can do any better and can do things any differently than the Sask party. The polls suggest numbers that are almost identical to the 2016 results right now. So how that suddenly alters in the course of a month or so, even with COVID, it would be something very surprising to me. That said, I kind of agree and disagree with the minister. It's absolutely true, as per my previous comment, that that we live in the here and now, and you do see when case numbers spike, added interest in the whole COVID thing. Certainly, this summer when we had issues on how to write colonies, certainly in the spring when we have issues in Lalash, there was a lot of more intense viewing of what was going on in government and policies. And we kind of know that now because the daily broadcast or the weekly broadcast now, in terms of the press conference, they're carried live. You got that feedback immediately. More people were interested, more people were listening, and you're going to see more of that in the election. That said, I do think there's one element, there's a bit of an awakening in terms of a lot of things that we are looking at differently because we have this once in a century, hopefully, only pandemic. And in your industry, how schools are built, whether the P3 model is going to be more successful or less successful, simple things like whether we can open windows or not, and whether it was such a great damn idea to seal them. I don't think it ever was, but the fact of the matter is that's something that they did for contractual and other reasons. Now it's an issue, and it was kind of an issue before, but now it's not. Things that, can we post things on walls? What do we do in schools to make them relatively hygienic? How we shop and how we do things differently are all going to be sort of bigger, broader issues. And I think if any political party can tap into that in a bit more meaningful way, they'll at least get traction. What traction means right now, I don't know. For the NDP, if they get up to 20 seats, that's huge traction, but I'm kind of wondering if they'll even be able to do that for their current 13.
Right. Okay. So Joel, any thoughts from your perspective in terms of whether or not, a spike in COVID numbers could have a shift in the outcome of the election?
Yeah, I think, my assessment, having worked with political parties, is that both of them will have a playbook right now, and the playbook doesn't necessarily have COVID in it, but COVID will be an impact. They will try to address the issues that Murray and I have been talking about. But as you said, if COVID numbers spike, the change in the feeling around the election will change, and it will have an impact. And again, borrowing Murray's words on this, it's a here and now sort of thing. If the numbers stay low, both parties will stick to their playbook. If the numbers don't stay low and you have issues in school, this election will take a corner that I don't know if anybody can predict. I suspect. Sorry, go ahead, Murray.
No, kids are the wild card, aren't they, Joel?
Yeah.
People react to them in a different way than maybe they do even their folks in senior homes. I'm just sort of seeing a lot of different reactions from people that you wouldn't think would react that particular way when they're talking about sending their kids back into crowded classrooms and such. Normally teachers are relatively reasoned and logical because of what they have to deal with in the classroom. Sometimes you're not seeing that. And sometimes I think you're not seeing that is because of the elements driving the debate right now. And that certainly is the uncertainty that you're talking about right now. And whoever captures that, but please, yeah, you were making good points before I started babbling. I got to call him for that.
That's okay.
So actually, then let me follow up on that a little bit. Sorry, we're going to go a little off script, but if so, let's assume for a second that there's a spike in cases and that it doesn't really have necessarily an effect on how people would vote in terms of who they would vote for, but it might actually have an impact in terms of how they would vote in terms of the whole voting and voting by mail and all of those kinds of things. So is that going to have? Are we going to see lower turnout, do you think, because people, and I'll start with you and Joel on this, but do you think we might see lower turnout because people are concerned about going out to the polls because of COVID? I mean, forget the fact that the outcome might be, clearly decided already, but they might be concerned about COVID. Might we see more mail-in ballots? And is that going to shift the way that political parties have to operate as they're getting ready for voting day?
Yes. So a couple of quick answers. I actually think that the turnout will be low on this time. The thing that I've always found with with political campaigns and people voting is the tougher you make it for them to vote, the less likely they are to vote. If I have to make, I haven't done anything with respect to figuring out how I'm supposed to do a mail-in ballot yet. So it's just, and of the 15 things that I'm trying to do, it's like the 16th at this point in time. So that'll have an impact. The answer to the second question, Mark, is it's already had an impact on how campaigns are being run. We saw earlier these last couple of months that the SAS party has begun to use I think it's Karen in this particular
Kate,
case.
yes, the Kate.
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 Here's a little bit more difficult.
They've started to use Kate, which is something that they kind of indicated that they weren't happy with within the House. I think that because of the way this election is going to run, you'll probably see more paper media, you'll probably see more digital media, and you'll probably see more advertising media on the television stations, because it's hard to get out right now. And even door knocking, I've talked to a few folks, and it's, you go to the door, you're wearing a glove, you're wearing a mask, you're standing 6 feet away, you're having trouble communicating. So the normal go to the door knock, identify your voter, shake hands, it's an interesting dynamic. And again, because all of these things are there, this should be an interesting election to see how it's going to affect the numbers.
Murray, thoughts on how it affects the political process and perhaps voter turnout?
I really want to get back to Joel's point about how the actual campaign is going to be affected, because you're going to see it. There's going to be a lot of babies going unkissed in this particular election campaign because, as Joel points out, it's a different campaign. But before I lose that, or before I lose the thought, it's interesting that you raised the issue related to the mail-in ballots, Joel, because and Mark, because today I believe is the day that the Chief Electoral Officer Boda and the Chief Medical Officer Shahab are going to come forward with their recommendations as to how to do this. And it's going to change things quite significantly. I think, fortunately, from a scrutiny and accumulation of results perspective in this election, it probably won't be close enough to make any difference. But I actually didn't know this up until now, because it held no relevance up until before. You can mail right up until election day. You get your mail in, and nobody pays a goddamn bit of attention to it because the few mail-in ballots that we get each year don't really swing many ridings. Well, I guess theoretically, with more mail-in ballots this year, it could. Now, by our calculations and by whatever speculation we do in our industry, we're not anticipating a huge lot of close ridings, particularly in places like rural Saskatchewan, where it might be slightly harder to get to the polls anyway, or there might be less of an unwillingness because of age of population or whatever. But it could be one of those factors. But I really actually like Joel's point and how interesting it's going to be when you don't have the same campaign that you used to have. And if Joel's point is that it's the party that adapts quickest to the change, I think I'm in wholehearted agreement. We're seeing that in terms of Kate and the phone calls happening right now, in which the Sask Party, I think, are just adopting quicker to modern ways of reaching voters. And the NDP, for whatever reason, seem to be scoffing at this notion. And you can see them on their social media feeds busily each night, knocking on doors. But those of us who are kind of have a working familiarity with how door knocking election campaigns go, kind of know how fruitless that's getting anyway. Particularly when you're in the situation of the NDP, where there's still a few months away from the election, and hadn't had half their candidates nominated. You just can't get around to them. This is a more effective way of getting to a lot of people. Maybe you can't zero in on as many voters in a particular riding, but what Kate's doing is allowing the Sask Party to identify their voters. And you can bet that if you say, yeah, I'm voting Sask Party, you're going to get 2 or 3 more Kate calls by election day saying, can we get you right to the polls? Can we find out a way to do that? Where do you live? All that stuff that's all either valuable information to them or valuable tools in terms of getting them in. So from that perspective, it's interesting, as per what Joel's saying, in terms of what effect that might have. And I truly believe the party that best captures these new innovations in campaigning in Saskatchewan is the one that's going to survive and thrive the most. And at this particular point, once again, it speaks to the success of the Sask Party, who look like they kind of have a better idea of modern campaigning than what I'm seeing from the NDP right now, who are still out there knocking on doors.
Interesting. So let's talk about outcome then. So, I mean, we referenced polling at the start, and I think the latest poll shows that the Sask Party has a fairly commanding lead, which has been relatively consistent other than I think for some time shortly after the 2017 budget. And so it looks like, if the polls are to be believed, we'll be looking at another majority government of the Saskatchewan Party. So do you believe the polls? Do you think that those are a good indicator of where we're at today? And if so, why are the NDP struggling to make any headway in terms of making connection with voters? And whoever wants to start on that one can.
Yeah, the polls have it kind of identical to what it was last time. I don't think we're in for any big surprises with this.
What's going on with the NDP? Why have they, a party that used to be able to win elections in Saskatchewan is now going to be almost 20 years without having won an election in Saskatchewan? Why are they struggling to connect with voters?
So yeah, going back, I think the polls are right. I mean, I think the polls have been in favor of the Sask Party for quite some time. Based on what they're doing, based on the response, that I read or listen to, there hasn't been a bunch of bad press about it. Education got hit a little bit, but I'm not sure you could answer the education question correctly. Secondly, Mark, I think, and I have to go back to my experience when I was working in and around the Ledge. My sense is that the NDP have moved to the left. Ryan is definitely, more left than, Lauren Calvert would have been, or Lauren's predecessors on that. And I'm not sure I'm not sure it resonates within the party, and I'm not sure it resonates with the voters at this point in time. And if we look at most of the elections that have been held in the last little while, provincially, here, other provinces, other jurisdictions, politics seems to be gathering around the center as opposed to the wings at this point in time. And I think my estimation is that if they were slightly more centrist, I think you'd get a better response at this point in time.
Okay, Murray?
In terms of the outcome, I do a few of these things. So I make a different prediction in every one. But on this day, September 2nd, 2020, I'm predicting 17 NDP seats, 44. And if it's actually accurate, that's all you're going to hear in the prediction, is that just that one little clip in the date so that I can forever brag about it. But I'll make 10,000 different ones after that. Why I'm thinking it's that wide a margin, and why I don't think the NDP are going to make up much ground is for every reason Joel mentioned. I think under Miley, they have moved further left. I think the province has moved further right, and nobody kind of gets that. There's another poll out today showing sort of the federal split right now, where Saskatchewan has actually surpassed Alberta in terms of being the most conservative province right now, according to poll, which surprised the hell out of me, to be honest with you. I thought Alberta would forever have that honors, and it really shows the ugly, liberal conservative west right split. But it also shows what's going on in this province, combined with what Joel, I think, accurately described as sort of going a little further left under Miley, going a little more urban, going a little bit more of the social justice woke crowd that I think Miley tends to appeal to. I don't think it puts him good stead for where he needs to make inroads, and whether the NDP, quite frankly, aren't even trying. There's 29 rural seats out there, and for the most part, to the NDP, it's almost as if they don't exist. And one of the reasons it's almost as if they don't exist is because they have a snowball's chance in hell of winning any one of them. Like, that's where the Sask party really piles up those magnificent numbers of 75%, 65%, sometimes in the 80% wins. And if you track them as much as we do, and I'm sure you guys do this, the same thing either informally or otherwise, you start to, if you start to see what it takes the Sask party to get to the critical 32 seats, versus what it's going to take the NDP to get to the critical 32 seats. For the NDP, it's almost an impossibility. They have to sweep the north, they have to sweep the cities, and then they're still not quite there, given everything else. For Sask party, they got to sweep rural Saskatchewan. Well, been there, done that for the last 4 elections, and will continue to do so, because I think most of rural Saskatchewan in particular, most of Saskatchewan, but most of rural Saskatchewan, I don't think distinguishes between Ryan Miley and Justin Trudeau.
Interesting. So there's a simultaneous shift on the party in one direction and the province in another, which is leaving that gap that we're seeing in the polls.
I think so, and I think it has a lot to do with struggling, ever struggling agriculture, oil really being staunch in its position of trying to survive in this post-COVID world, and just the general reaction to the East, Trudeau, everything else that bleeds over into provincial politics.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk, and we'll start with you on this one, Murray, about the strengths and weaknesses of each party. So, I mean, we're not even talking about the third parties, but or the however many others there are. But let's talk Saskatchewan Party and NDP. Your perception of their biggest strengths and biggest weaknesses going into the election.
Well, I'll be quick because I kind of like Joel's view on this too, but I think they're somewhat similar, if not diametrically opposed, but similar in notion, in the sense that the strength of the Sask party and the NDP is their appeal to their base. The problem being is the NDP base is wee tiny, and the Sask party, because of the nature of the province right now, I think is much larger because it encompasses everything in terms of rural Saskatchewan. Where the Sask party obviously has its weaknesses is in the city, is sort of the maybe the more educated, changing professional view from voters in the province. Really, in some places, the very people that are going to carry the province forward in terms of technology and sort of the new economy and everything else. But that said, we're still a resource-based province. The Sask party is absolutely solid in rural Saskatchewan, in farming, in mining, in agriculture, the meat and potatoes places where it makes us most money. It's surprisingly, or has been surprisingly, solid in sort of union working class, not necessarily the leadership, but as we saw in terms of the support for the Federated Co-op strike or other things, we're basically seeing a lot of traditional union vote that would have gone NDP, staying home and voting Sask party. If you work at the Upgrader, if you work at Everest Place, there's a good possibility that you're going to vote Sask party as much as you're going, or even more so than you're going to vote NDP. And I don't think I've ever seen that in my lifetime. The NDP strength is obviously in the fact that its supporters are diehard, but two problems with that. its old base of supporters are dying out. Like, I mean, gone are the Douglas era, like hell, gone are now the Romano Calvert era, because it's been 20 years and they're not regenerating in terms of those young people. And a lot of those young people, I'm talking about either in the professions or whatnot, the issues with teachers and other people kind of help out maybe a bit to the NDP, but its base is just too damn small to really have any kind of meaningful effect on most ridings. It's not calling out to people where it particularly needs to get votes. And you can only have so many university professors supporting you in this province. I don't mean to be glib, but I mean, that tends to be the problem right now. Politics is something more than just an intellectual exercise. There's a certain level of pragmatism and practicality to it. And under Miley and maybe under the last couple NDP leaders in opposition, they just haven't realized that.
Haven't been able to grow the base or to rejuvenate it in any way. Interesting. Joel, your thoughts on strengths and weaknesses from each party?
Well, it's interesting because I think it's leadership right now. I think that, for the time that, for the Brad Wall era and for the Scott Moe era, both of them have ranked, highly in terms of their support, and even being, the most popular or the most popular premier in Canada at this point in time. So I think on the Sask party strength, it's their leadership. It's that Scott's or Premier Moe's popularity didn't seem to change. It's probably changed a little bit in the last little while. And then, talking about the NDP, and we did talk about this a little earlier, it's the leadership on their end, and it's for all the same reasons that Murray talked about. You can only have so many university professors vote for you. You can only have so many union members vote for you. And, I think, again, talking back to what Murray talked about, I think on the whole, the Sask party has been fairly successful at keeping Saskatchewan kind of working and kind of going at this point in time. So the typical base of the labor movement is we need work and we need good work. Well, they've had work and they've had good work over the last little while, so they're less likely to interrupt something. And with growth at the upgrader, with the possibility of potash mines happening in Saskatchewan, not that I want to bring it up, but even keeping the bypass busy. I mean, everybody's been busy over the last little while. Weaknesses.
Except the bypass.
Sorry?
Except the bypass.
Weaknesses. I think the weaknesses is I would say the Sask party is getting into the seventh inning stretch at this point in time. I think Premier Moe has to put his stamp and his direction on the party at this point in time. I think you need to be able to point at the direction and say what he's doing, whether that's implementing the things that came out in the growth plan, or changing the growth plan as it's been affected by COVID. With respect to the NDP, their greatest strength is that they seem to have a hold on the cities. I think it's for the reasons that Murray talked about, is that they have a tendency to do well in probably poorer neighborhoods or affluent neighborhoods. And I know that's kind of an oxymoron, but if you look at the seat distribution, it's a few of the less I'm looking for a word, but the poorer neighborhoods, they have a tendency to do well in or around.
I had an old neighbor that called them drawing room socialists. I always love that term, and that's what it is in sort of Cathedral and Crescents and everything in places like Regina.
And that's where I see their strength. And again, going to Murray, the issue there is that those areas, the demographics are changing as well. So it will be interesting to see how well they do in those areas. Murray made a projection. I'll make a little bit of a projection. I think we're going to see exactly what we've got right now. The NDP have 4 people that they are looking that retired. Those seats come into structure, but I've kind of argued at this point in time If the seats that are NDP haven't gone Sask Party by now, they're less likely to go Sask Party in this kind of election. So I know that's a boring projection, but I'm pretty comfortable saying it's going to be around the same.
Which would be, if you look back to 3 years ago, if you were to tell the government you're going to get the same results you had the year before, I think they'd be pretty ecstatic about that, and the NDP would be pretty devastated by that, because to hold the line is not really progress, right? So, Joel, I want to start with you. This is another one off script, but I'm curious about it. It builds on the answer you gave to the weakness of the Sask Party, which is that they're entering into the 7th inning stretch, which I sort of took as, okay, how do you get renewal? Right? And how do you bring in new people? How do you find a new identity? You said the premier needed to put his stamp on the party. Can you give your thoughts so let's look forward 4 years, let's assume they win, they've been there for 20 years. That's 1/5 of a century. What are they going to need to do over the next 4 years to make sure that they can be revitalized and continue to be fresh and effective as a government?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we'll likely see is we'll see a change in the ministers of the province. As it sits right now, there have been very few changes in ministers. Most of the ministers that are in place are those ministers that were there when Premier Wall was there. And I think for party renewal and such, you're going to have to see. And I'm not making any predictions, but you're going to have to see some of the newer Sask Party candidates or MLAs rise up, and like a Todd Gowdy or a Stephen Bonk, or there are multiple people that can do it. But I think that shows renewal. I think it's the changing of the guard that will need to happen at that point in time. And that would be it. The second answer to your question, Mark, is I think that they will need, or Premier Moe will need to come out with some not directional change from the Sask Party, because I think it's been successful, but I think he'll have to come out in the next little while with some platform or some policies that are his, that fomented in his mind and can be implemented under this government. Right now, my assessment is we haven't seen a lot of that at this point in time. So that would give the renewal, and it would refresh the government, in my opinion.
Okay, excellent. Thanks. Murray, same question to you. How does the Sask Party, as they're let's say, assume they win the next election, how do they make sure that they renew and stay fresh so that they can continue to govern and to have the connection with voters that they seem to have now?
Well, Joel's point that they need younger blood coming in is absolutely true and critical. I can think of Mr. Gowdy, I can think of Everett Hindley, and after that, I'm trying to think of MLAs that are much younger than I am, and that's problematic, as you can see by this visual. And I also think they can only go so much further under the current leadership formula. They have, Joel talked about sort of the strength of leadership, and I think he's dead on, because right now Scott Moe has has what everybody's sort of pointing to as a new factor in politics, the hog factor, the hell of a guy, the Doug Ford thing, where people can relate to him. And Doug Ford kind of went from 33% in the polls to right now the second, I think, rated top premier in terms of popularity right now, because COVID has disclosed him as being a hell of a guy in terms of the way he's handled that. Scott Moe's not a great speaker. He doesn't articulate his ideas well. You don't get a great sense of ideas, but I think he's generally seen as a hell of a guy, and that's kind of something that they want. Well, that's great, but it does tend to wear on the voters when they stop being a hell of a guy, and that is, as we saw earlier in Ford's tenure, that can certainly happen quickly, and it can change around, and it can change around again. And so I think that's sort of one thing the Sask party can't rely on. You talked about 3 years ago, and that it's very interesting because then 3 years ago, we were right in the middle of the 2017 budget, where the NDP actually, without a leader, pulled even with Brad Wall, who was probably the ultimate hell of a guy in terms of hitting the right notes in Saskatchewan in terms of what people liked and appreciated. So it's got to be a combination of younger people. It's got to be a combination of people, not just the leader, but certainly the leader offering more depth. I think that Scott Moe can govern and for a long time under the current circumstances in Saskatchewan, because quite honestly, he has no opposition. And unfortunately for Ryan Miley, I'm not so sure he's seen as a hell of a guy, even though he is a very nice man. But I'm not sure he's seen that way by a lot of voters out right now. And but if you want long-term success in this party, you have to present a long-term vision. And I think, as Joel noted, they've kind of lost sight of whatever that's going to be. You can talk about pipelines and taking on Trudeau and everything else for a certain length of time, but eventually that's going to wear thin in this province too. You still have to look at how you're building an economy. I kind of like what they did in their growth plan, talking about bold ambitions and of one point another 200,000 people and another 100,000 jobs. But once again, that tends to be a problem when you got COVID come along and blow that out of the water. That's not going to happen in 10 years right now. So they have to reassess, rediscover, and start looking a little bit more open-mindedly, maybe at the new energy sector, maybe at maybe stronger environmental policies, maybe stronger urban policies addressing some of the inner city issues that I don't think are being addressed right now. All those things are going to have to be rediscovered in some kind of policy planning session for the Sask party in the coming years, if they are truly serious about holding on for any longer. There again, they might just not have any opposition for a long time and hold on anyway.
That's actually probably a good segue into my next question, which you were talking about policy and finding the new policy direction. And elections aren't really times when policies are talked about a whole lot. And so we're probably not going to have the big issues that maybe should be discussed during the election discussed. So from your perspective, Murray, we'll start with you. What's the big issue, or maybe a couple, that we're not going to hear about during the election, but we should be talking about?
They do tend, and this is one advantage the NDP might have. They do float around sort of what the future of this province looks like. We can't get by on minimum wage jobs at Walmart and McDonald's and everything else. It's been great for the new Saskatchewan that sees a lot of new Canadians accepting of that role. But what generally happens to people when they become successful in a new country? Well, if they can't get the money here, they're going to go elsewhere for it. And I'm not so sure that place is Alberta anymore, because the economy is too similar, but it might be Ontario or BC or some other place where they're going to be moving forward, and we're going to start losing those populations if we can't translate this growth, and it's close to 200,000 people in the last 10, 15 years, into something that's going to be more productive and doing things. Part of it's, the people that we're bringing in are hard workers and entrepreneurial. That's going to be one thing that people are going to have to really tap into in terms of how to utilize these people. We can't do it on the agriculture base anymore. As we all know, farms are getting bigger, and population in rural Saskatchewan is simply getting smaller. And for whatever economic success there's going to be in that sector, it's not going to be the driver of population and jobs and other things that it once was, because we're becoming more automated and everything else. Pretty soon we're going to see tractors driving in the field all by themselves. And that's just a simple reality in the next little while. We have to take that square on. We have to figure out what the hell can we do with all this wind and sun and everything else to actually utilize it into resources with a changing climate. What does that mean in terms of what we can grow and what we can build on in this particular province? But certainly I think more from a technological edge. What can we build with through our universities? How can we grow? How can we basically look at other ways to do things, and I think there's ample opportunity. There's always ample opportunity. We're getting to be a smarter, more educated society all along. But we also are dragging with us some of the old problems that go beyond sort of the immigration issues, which really aren't a problem, but certainly not dealing with the First Nations issues, not dealing with sort of the class poverty in this particular province. We still have a disproportional number of reserves that are poor and have ample social problems. Until we start addressing them, until we start kind of healing in more of a way of communities, particularly the rural community and the First Nations community, working more in unison as opposed to some of the events we've seen in the past, we're not going to be moving forward. Embracing urban reserves, other things is going to be a huge issue. I think all those things are things that political parties should look at and see how their philosophy intertwines with growth in those particular areas, growth and improvement.
Right. There's a lot of issues in there, but what I was hearing was sort of an overall theme of how do we become the province we want to become, right? And there's a lot of different components to that, and yeah, it's not really a discussion that's that we hear a lot about from our politicians. Sometimes
You're not going to see that in a pamphlet, no.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Joel, what are your thoughts in terms of the big issues that we won't be hearing about in the election, but we should be talking about?
Well, I think one of the issues will be about how we sustain the province. I mean, I don't think there's very many people would say that the province hasn't been successful over the last little while, and I think because of COVID and because of the health, it's going to take a large part about this. So, or a large part of the ink and the time on the election. So I'm not sure it's going to be discussed as fully and as robustly as it should. I think the other one that we're or maybe we haven't got to it yet is the federal government has made some pretty serious changes on EI, on environmental policy and so on. And I guess the best description I could say in this one is the interaction between the federal government and the provincial government. I mean, we saw in Alberta or in Saskatchewan, we appointed our own chief firearms officer in the first time in however long gun management has been around. There are cracks there, and I know that federal provincial relations is a huge issue that has no bottom in it. So it'd be interesting to see how that one comes out. And I guess the other thing I was picking up on Murray, I think one of the things we're seeing is the change in innovation, the change in technology, the change in IT as it goes forward. And I think that's kind of the next generation of business in Saskatchewan. And I don't think we're going to have as robust of a discussion at this point in time, because I think there are some things that need to be done in order to help sustain that or help create that in Saskatchewan. Again, I think that the health issue, the COVID issue, is going to take so much time on this that the big discussions are likely going to be short or not there at all.
So Joel, I was just wondering if you could expand on the first point you made. You talked about sustaining the province, and that's how we do that. Do you want to just elaborate a little more on what you meant? Were you talking specifically economic there, or?
I'm wrapping it all up in one big bow. With the things that I guess what I look at in Saskatchewan is we've had a number of periods of fairly significant growth. Part of it was because we had oil hit and agriculture hit and our mineral resources hit at the same point in time. The reality is we're not hitting on all of those cylinders at this point in time. So I think the government has to look at a way to determine on how they sustain growth in all of those areas, Mark. And I think it's again, I hate to keep bringing up the growth plan, but I think it's implementing the things that we see in the growth plan to move it forward. We need, the COVID issue that we're dealing with right now has been a fairly significant hiccup, and I think I'm getting the sense, or at least I'm wanting to see a picture of the future so that I can plan on how I'm going to be part of it. My experience in politics is everybody wants to be part of something good. If we can get that from either of the two parties, we'll get the kind of renewal that we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Yeah. Okay. I got two more questions I'm going to ask you guys. This next one builds off the question I just asked you. So about the big issues that you think are important that we're not going to hear about in the election. I have one that I'm pretty sure we're not going to hear about in the election, and I'd like your take on it. One of the things we're hearing from a lot of our member companies and from potential investors into Saskatchewan is the challenge of navigating the web of municipal relationships in Saskatchewan, with over almost 800, I think it is, across the province. I mean, don't get me wrong, I used to work at SUMA. I'm a big believer in municipalities and in the importance of local government. But when it comes to economic development, the mishmash of governance is challenging. This is but it's almost like a political third rail in Saskatchewan. Nobody wants to touch it, and nobody wants to deal with it. And yet there's no real solution for a business that wants to come in here and invest here and have a plan here, but can't figure out, how to navigate the transportation issues between an RM and a town, or the water service issues. And I know you're both familiar with this issue and have been familiar with it for a long time. So I'm curious about your perspective in terms of how we can begin to have a conversation about this in Saskatchewan, recognizing that it's just the politics of it are challenging. And Murray, maybe we'll start with you.
It's really an only Nixon could go to China thing for those old of us to remember Nixon. I absolutely believe only the Saskatchewan Party can talk about and deal with the elephant in the room, which is SARM. We can't have 296 municipalities functioning effectively. They're not functioning effectively in the parameters that you've laid out. Yeah, it's great if their only role is graveling whatever and somebody working free for in essence, their neighbors and doing so. But that's not even what most of the municipalities are getting to be about. A lot of them are running into big time legal decisions and big time issues, as you've described. And that's the same thing happening in smaller communities and such. All this leads to talk of regional government, county systems, similar to what we're seeing in schools, boards and school districts that have been far more centralized. Certainly we've seen it in health districts already, where we have just one big district. But I guess the upside is, when I got to this province 37 years ago, 38 years ago now, there was thousands of these governments, local ambulance boards, far more municipal boards, local hospital boards, everything. And that's all been sort of coordinated in a way where we're delivering much more efficiency. So the process is happening slowly, but I think, as Mark is suggesting, it's probably not happening fast enough for our needs and how we're going to take this on. We're looking at those projects like irrigation, and how do you navigate that through a whole series of municipalities and other things, and environmental concerns that aren't just in the immediate area, but what happens in sort of the Cumberland House Delta, 100 miles away or thousands of miles away, where people just haven't ever been, that are making these decisions locally. All this has to be thought of in a more productive way, and obviously the NDP can't raise it because they have enough problems in rural Saskatchewan and in smaller communities. They're not going to. It's going to be up to Scott Moe. And at this particular point, I don't think they want to mess with their base and do this. And that's where the big problem lies. It's going to be a whole series of gentle nudging. One of the things that's happening is the problem with rural municipal politics is it's quite literally dying out, because you're dealing with, particularly the RMs, you're dealing with a lot of older people interested in councils. Younger people probably don't want to be involved in much because they're busy kind of running these operations and such. I shouldn't necessarily say that. I have no particularly statistical backing for that, but if you look at demographics of a SARM convention, it is what it is. All that is going to be changing in the next little while, because it just simply has to change, because the nature of the province is changing. But it might take a term or two for us to get to where we need to be.
Interesting. Joel, your thoughts on how we move that discussion forward?
I've kind of got Mark, I like your assessment of it being the third rail. It's tough to touch. When I first came to the province, it was an issue in the minister's office that I was in. It was probably the reason that we got into the minister's office that I got into. I think one of the things that I've been looking at with respect to this is I think the government can play a more active role in the navigation between the municipalities. And from the clients that I work with or the companies that I work with, when somebody comes in as an investor, you have to deal with the provincial government, and you have to deal with Ministry of Energy and Resources, and then you have to deal with the Ministry of the Environment, and then you have to deal with the Ministry of Government Relations, and then you have to deal with the Ministry of Highways. There isn't really a kind of a one-stop shop in this. And I think if the government was really interested in kind of moving forward, making it simple for these companies to come in rather than having to navigate all the different areas. And you do have to navigate a number of different areas. Potash mines are so large that they take up towns, the area that it would cover takes up towns, takes up villages, takes up municipalities and so on. And dealing with each of the local governments on there has its own uniqueness at that point in time. So I would like to see kind of investment support, kind of a one-stop shop. I think the government could look at that, and I think from the companies that I work with, that's kind of what they're expecting. The other thing I would say on the on the municipalities thing, I think that and Murray, you've written on it. I think municipal districts, I think municipal cooperation. I think the government, when they're doing their granting program and so on, when they say like, look, if you guys can work together on a regional project and that sort of stuff, I think you start to address some of the issues that we're talking about from a growth perspective. And then you find out, and doing a Dog River, that Dog River and Woolerton aren't completely opposed to one another, and that they can actually work together. And I think that the opportunity is there. I think it'll take some strength to do that for all the reasons that Murray brought up. It's tough in Saskatchewan politics, and it goes back to the beginning of this call. The Sask Party can win the election basically on the rural vote, and do you want to mess with your base?
Yeah.
Nobody wants to mention the C word, which is county.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you're right. And I mean, interesting though that you're suggesting, Joel, that there are mechanisms the government can use to coordinate investment opportunities better without making any changes to governance, right? So those mechanisms exist. And then, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I would say all three of us have been, we're through the Garcia report, right? The Garcia, if you're talking about the third rail, that was electrified and very dangerous at that point in time. The government has always shied away from doing something like that. So if you can figure out alternative methods of doing this, I think that would probably be their preferred method, actually. And then what you'll see, I think, over time is you'll begin to see, Murray, as you said, county systems, municipal districts, because these groups will start to need to get together in order to be just viable. Yeah.
Okay, last question for you guys. We're all political nerds. We love elections. We follow them all the time and get excited by them. But this election, the outcome seems like a bit of a foregone conclusion, other than whose prediction is going to be closer. So what excites you about this election? And the second part to this, Joel, and to Murray, is what's the most exciting election you can recall? And whoever wants to go first can.
Well, I'll start on this one. I'm going to say the 99 election because I met my wife on the 99 election.
Answer.
And for multiple reasons, the '99 election was interesting. It was the emergence of the Sask Party. It was probably the decline of the Liberal Party. The fact that we went into a coalition after it. It was an exciting time in politics because coalition governments, as we're all pretty much aware of, don't last as long as they should. So I like that one. And then you can go with the subsequent elections. I think the rise of the Saskatchewan Party has always been exciting. It's very interesting as a political observer to see how a party start, grow older, and adapt to something like that. It's an interesting time. This one will be exciting just because because there are so many unknown factors at this point in time. How will the new kind of campaigning work? How will COVID have an impact on this? All of the stuff that we've talked about at this point in time may be moot if the numbers, if we have a second wave, because that will substantially change how the. I don't think it'll substantially change how the election will outcome, but it will substantially change the discourse that goes on during the election.
Right. Interesting. Okay, thanks, Joel. Murray, you?
99 is an excellent choice, Joel. And it was an excellent choice because elections that are fun and exciting are all about surprises. And why I'm disinterested in this campaign at this particular time is that it seems so bloody predictable. There were other exciting elections and changing governments. Usually it's more exciting, obviously, when the government changes one way or the other. And even I'm too bloody, I'm not old enough to remember 82, but obviously that was the combination of both exciting change and unpredictability. Even 91, which was a hell of a fun election to cover, simply because you were dealing with the craziness coming off privatization, change of government, the government doing everything it could, like Fair Share Saskatchewan, to hold on to power, and everybody campaigning as hard as they can. I love the 86 election because it was crazy. It was really the first one I ever kind of really covered, and it was just nuts. Everybody was promising everything to everybody. Bad for the economy, stupidest damn thing we've ever done, but fun. Those were sort of elections that stand out. 95 was mildly interesting in the sense that all of a sudden it was sort of the Empire Strikes Back campaign where there was some substantial loss because of the hospitalization closures and everything else, and a lot of interesting things going on. One of the big problems right now for the last 4 campaigns I've covered, and it kind of started in 99, but 99 was a bit more fun because they were out there and there was that change. But pretty much from 2003 on, it's been up and down Highway 11. And I hope both the mindset, the coverage, and the politicking gets off Highway 11 this year, because there's a lot more interesting things going on in Saskatchewan than just in Moose Jaw and PA and Regina and Saskatoon. A little bit off Highway 11 with Moose Jaw, of course, but just that whole corridor. And we're doing too much campaigning along that way, and I hope they get away from that this time around. Maybe they can, because they'll be doing it virtually.
Yeah. Joel, did you have something you wanted to add to that, sorry?
Oh, I was going to say, the other thing that I find exciting about this one is because there's a potential for governance change, and I don't mean that we're going to see a new government get into place. It's the first Scott Moe election. And it's the how a party adapts to a change, a change coming off, such a strong leader as Brad Wall. For me, that's the excitement on this, and for the people of Saskatchewan, this is the first time that they've had the opportunity to vote for Scott Moe. So for me, there's some excitement in that, because and I don't mean, I don't think it's an unknown, but it might be a little bit of an unknown.
Well, we haven't seen him campaign as premier before, right? So I guess that's the Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. Okay, well, gentlemen, thank you so much, Joel and Murray, for making time to be with us today. I really appreciate it. As you know, this will become an article in our magazine, which will be coming out at the end of the month, and then we'll also be releasing the video at the same time, so that you can both be held to your predictions on election night. So,
Can I make 6 more?
Yeah, you absolutely can.
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much, everyone. Take care.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.